As the days went on after the arrival of Emma Swan, Rumpelstiltskin found himself leaving his shop more frequently than Cameron Gold ever did. He liked to walk in the streets in the evening, when it was quieter and people were making their way to their homes. There was so much to take in this new world, so many people to see and remember, and yet not one of them had been dealt as twisted a fate as Mr. and Mrs. Gold. Regina's malignity towards Snow White remained fixed on her, and he, as the only other person who seemed to have truly aggravated her, had been the only option when it came to binding her physically and emotionally to someone who wasn't her beloved Charming. The prince had to be out there, somewhere. The only reason he would not have been is if he was dead before the curse struck. From what Rumpelstiltskin could remember of the cemetery, there was no grave for the man, which could only mean he was alive, somewhere, separated from Snow White all over again. Really, he thought, as he walked down the main street, it would have been so much simpler if mother and child had got to safety together long before the curse hit. That was the plan. He didn't know what had gone wrong, but he certainly never intended to be married to one part of his true love pair of choice and looking for the other. Mother and child had been safely reunited. They had far too much in common already, even if they didn't know it yet, and Rumpelstiltskin was pleased to see that Mary Margaret was as taken with the girl as the girl was with her own son. Ties that bind, he mused, can never be truly broken, not by the most terrible curse in the world. Some links had been strained, but they were still there, even now. The faces were the same, even if the stories weren't quite right. He recognized everyone, now that he was looking. He remembered thousands of deals, every one of them coming to him for help, wealth, success, all manner of meaningless things. He remembered the one deal he had broken. He remembered the one deal he had ended. Strange that those two were the most valuable deals of all. Halfway down the main street, he paused at the sight of a familiar yellow car. He could see two booted feet propped up against the window of the back seat. He frowned, approaching, and remembered that Granny had been complaining about the mayor throwing city ordinances around regarding guests. It seemed that Snow White's daughter was every bit as hardy as the woman herself, sprawled in the back seat of her car, reading the Mirror. Rumpelstiltskin lifted his cane and tapped at the glass. Emma Swan shot up in the seat. He wondered at her constant state of fight or flight. There was something of her mother in it, but such a thing had to be cultivated by a life where it was a necessary trait. Bail bondswoman, bounty hunter. There were skills she had to make her way in the world in those roles. Her expression changed at the sight of him, and she gave him a rueful smile as she opened the door and slid out of the car. "Hey, that doesn't look entirely comfortable," he observed. "Did my ears deceive me, or did the city ordinances mean you were turned out of Granny's?" Emma made a face. She looked so very like Mary Margaret when she was past anger but still frustrated. "She thinks that my going without a bed is really going to be a trial. She has another thing coming," she said. "I've slept in much worse places than the back of my car." Rumpelstiltskin's lips twitched. "I'm not sure how I should take that, dear," he said. Emma rolled her eyes with a snort. "If you're done teasing, maybe you can help me out here," she said, holding up the newspaper. "I've been trying to find somewhere to stay, but it doesn't look like there are any places to let at the moment. At all, even." She gave him a hopeful smile. "You're Mr. Property. Do you know of anywhere?" He set his cane back down on the ground, his hand curving over the handle. It would be the perfect time to offer a deal, to get the Savior to owe him, to have some little piece of leverage in the coming war. It would have been so easy to slip into the same old habits. Everything would have been so much simpler if he didn't want the girl to be on his side, if he didn't want the curse broken, if he didn't want some way to gently keep Mary Margaret at arm's length. "Unfortunately, all my properties are occupied," he said in all honesty. As she had observed, there was no room in Storybrooke for a stranger. Her face fell, and she looked back at the newspaper with a sigh of frustration. He hesitated, then added, "However, you may have noticed that Mary Margaret and I have a large house. There are several guest rooms." He didn't know who was more surprised by the offer, him or her. That's kind of you," she said, and really she had no idea just how exceptional an offer it was. She looked self-consciously down at the paper, then back at him. I don't do well with others. She looked strangely childlike, almost as if she wanted some kind of assurance that refusal was acceptable. Thank you, though. He remembered another child, long ago, so determined, so brave, and yet, underneath it all, still not as self-assured as he tried to be. He remembered another woman, not a warrior like this one, but still both as brave and unsure. If you change your mind, he said, opening the doors of his home to a stranger who was not really a stranger for the first time in decades. The offer stands. No strings attached. Her smile strengthened. Thank you, she said. I'll keep that in mind. He offered her a brisk smile in return, then continued on his way, leaving her with her car, her paper, and not much else. Thank you.